are not, but I hope we are.
So I think we might start already.
I'm very happy to be with Silva.
So welcome all. I'm Franck Guéry from the Cercle Europe of Sciences Po Alumni. I'm really happy to open this conference. We have three great speakers that I will present just after. The Cercle Europe aims to organize some conference, an exchange about European Union and Europe in general. And we are working together also with the students in Sciences Po. And I will let Sylvia share a few words. Sylvia.
Thank you very much, Frank. Yes, welcome to you all. I'm Sylvia, and now I'm representing the section of Europe in the Association of the School of Public Affairs in Sciences Po. We are an association of students. Normally we organize great events in Sciences Po, in the beautiful rooms of Sciences Po. And of course, this year we have to convert to the online, which allows also to have some great speakers that most probably wouldn't have had the possibility to come to Sciences Po. So it's actually also an opportunity though. And we have a weekly review that we create also together with the alumni, and we work together with the professors of the school. We organize summits, meetings, and different kind of activities throughout the year.
Thank you very much, Sylvia. Do you want to share a few words about the conference?
Absolutely. Maybe I can even start with a small presentation that we created. That's here. This is actually a presentation that takes place in a cycle that is called Power, Democracy, Citizens and Europe, because we want to focus on the civil society and the democratic aspect of our union that are very talked about in a very theoretical way in some of our courses, but that still recover a very crucial role in our society and our everyday life as citizens. Today, we have the great opportunity to meet three experts of the civil society, European civil society, that we thank for being here. And as I said, if you want to participate in the quick poll that we created on WooClap for the ones that joined right now, you can use the code that you see on the right or the QR code that you see on the left, and I'll share the results with you during the conversation. In this way, we can see how they will change throughout this presentation.
So,
yes,
please.
exactly. We'll have the possibility to talk with the experts. We'll ask them some questions, and in the end, we'll have a question and answer session. So for all of your questions, just write them in the chat, and afterwards, we'll have the opportunity to ask them to the experts.
Thank you very much, Sylvia. And so we will start with asking three questions to our three speakers. And there will be a rotating way of proceeding. I will first introduce you with Guillaume Klossa. We're very delighted to have Guillaume today. Guillaume has a very comprehensive background. He's a European thinker and practitioner. He founded EuropaNova. He also worked in business. He founded the European Young Leaders Program, and he worked in the European Broadcasting Union, Eurovision, one of the largest global alliance of media. He's very close to former President Juncker. He participated in the former commission as a special advisor in charge of artificial intelligence and GAFA regulation with Vice President Andrus Ansip. And not only work for the European institution, but also work for France at the time of Jean-Pierre Jouyet during the last French presidency. So it's very relevant also in view of 2022. He negotiated in particular the right to an Erasmus for all, and he was also involved in the Future of Europe think tank. Now he is invited also not only for this background, but also for the civil society background, because he co-chairs now the transnational civic movement Civico Europa, which was involved in the call in the 9th of May 2016. And he also ran a large consultation, the We Europeans consultation. You might have seen posters in the Paris metro, and it targeted and touched 38 million citizens in 27 countries in 25 languages. Quite impressive achievements. He taught also at Sciences Po Paris, Collège Europe, and other institutions like HEC, ENA. And he founded, as I mentioned earlier, EuropaNova, also the European think tank. He is also author of several essays like European Youth, Europe the Last Chance, and in expressing himself largely in the French and also European media. We can quote Le Monde, Le Figaro, and BFM from time to time. So we will start with Guillaume to ask the same question to our three speakers, and with your background will be even more relevant. So can you tell us, maybe Guillaume, what you think about the power of civil society and in the EU? And it's especially relevant because you were involved not only in the civil society, but also in business and in the institution, but both in national and European framework. So if you could summarize quickly, Guillaume, in 3-4 minutes, what can you tell us about the power of civil society?
First of all, civil society is a wide word, so we need to explain what it does mean or to give a specific meaning. For me, it's engaged civil society. It's not lobbying. It's not business. It's people who believe they have a specific responsibility with regard to the future of Europe and who are engaged in order to change and to impact this future. So it's very important to have a definition, because there are many definitions about civil society. First thing. Second thing, the question is, when can you have impact? Because most of the time, politicians doesn't want to listen to civil society, and they consider civil society as a useful object, a useful partner, but they don't listen. They exploit it. So regarding my experience, you have an impact when there is not anymore political leadership. I give you some example. After the French no referendum, all European leaders were completely lost, and nobody knew how to relaunch Europe. And the idea of the Lisbon Treaty, and what Sarkozy called at the time the Simplified Treaty, came from civil society. When we were during the last economic and financial crisis, at the time I was a sherpa at the European Council in charge of future of Europe, I can tell you that most of relevant ideas were not coming from politicians and from their senior advisor. It came from experts everywhere in the world, and the capacity for them to gather and to impact. If we think about the Brexit period, and before the Brexit, I don't know if you remember, but David Cameron asked European institutions, national leader, European Union EP leader not to do everything. And there was a political vacuum. So at the time, we launched a movement of the 9th of May, a call for European Renaissance, May the 9th, 2016, in order to push unity post-Brexit. And we work with political leaders, with Merkel, with Hollande, with Renzi, with Tusk, with Juncker, in order to develop a converging position of European leaders in case of Brexit. And there is a role of civil society. Another example, I don't know if you remember, but just before the election of European Parliament, most political groups and political leaders we are speaking about a big move of populist movement. And we organize, we European, this very big consultation in order to push political party to focus on other topics than populist. And we make this huge survey with this huge consultation process, including 38 million Europeans. And what he said is this survey is the key objective of the next commission should be sustainable development, democracy, social affairs, GAFA regulation, and research and education. And at the end of the day, that was the objective of the von der Leyen Commission. So when there is a political vacuum, there is a specific role for civil society to bring ideas, to push them, and to impact. I want to remind one thing. There will not be a European unity with regard to the Brexit if European citizens were against. And when you look at survey about European citizens, European barometer, you saw that in every country, they wanted a united Europe. So they push political leaders, and civil society had a specific role in this respect in order to keep Europe united during the Brexit negotiation. Regarding the question of a European budget, political leaders were very reluctant, but there was a push from European citizens and many civil society organizations to have a common budget, a common recovery plan based upon a European common budget. Mm-hmm. And the meaning is very clear, is politicians want to give the signal that they have the lead, but in the fact, they are very depending and very following public opinion, and very often this public opinion is influenced by the work of civil society, and this work is done under decades and decades. It's not a work you see, it's a small work, it's an underground work, but it impacts society, and by that, it's impacting the decision of political leaders. So I really believe in civil society, but civil society is not organized, and there is a challenge, which is to build a European public space for citizens to be able to think together at the European scale and not in 27 national silos.
Thank you very much, Guillaume. And now I will pass the floor to Anya Skripek. Thank you, Anya, for being there. Let me introduce her a little bit. She's Director for Research and Training at the Foundation for European Progressive Studies. She holds a PhD cum laude in political science from the University of Warsaw. Before joining FAPS in 2009, Anya worked as a researcher at the Faculty of Journalism and Political Science at the University of Warsaw, and she also served twice consecutively as elected Secretary General of the Young European Socialists, and she is an author of over 80 published books, papers, and articles, quite impressive, available in English, German, French, and Polish. So we are really delighted to welcome Anya. Thank you very much for being there. And I will raise the same question than before with Guillaume. Can you tell us, Anya, what you think about the power of civil society in the EU?
Absolutely, but first and foremost, thank you for inviting me. I'm absolutely humbled to be called by you, Sciences Po alumni, as the role model. It's also terrifying, and equally terrifying to look at my own photo, which is definitely from pre-COVID times, suggesting a haircut would be something I would definitely need before coming in front of the camera next time. But, you know, not to be self-centered, rather focus on the subject related and 3 minutes that you generously have offered me to explain the whole power of the civil society. I would start from the following thing. In 2005, which for many might be long time ago, but, since you quoted my CV, it will be quite clear that it's connected with my beginnings as the youth activism. Some very brave people decided to join action together and improve the world. How did they decide to do it? They decided to make a joint call against poverty. And suddenly, within just few weeks, the whole world was tearing the white t-shirts, white bed sheets, whatever white they could have, to put on their wrist a very simple thing, a white band that was a sign of collective action, of getting together and of saying the world is on the wrong pace. We need to do something about poverty. And that was at the time that many of the governments were saying, listen, you know, it's very hard, budgetary consolidation, European Union enlargement, this and that, very hard, very, very hard stuff. But the atmosphere of the movement that was growing in power, and suddenly everybody know what GCAP was, 2005, was incredible. It was magnetic. I was also one of the believers of the GCAP. Back then, I was part of the youth organization. So we joined the coalition because one of the important things about the civil society organized is to be in a coalition, to build social majority, to build the mood for a change based on a belief that the reality that we have is not a just one, but we can change it. And with that, I arrived to circumstances that for many can be quite puzzling, namely the Labour Party conference. Back there, Labour students actually pushed me in front of Gordon Brown, who, let's not forget, was the Chancellor of Exchequer. They introduced me as this, you know, European weirdo who comes in. And so, you know, in the 1 minute conversation, he's like, so what's your message? What's going on? You are having this white band. My son is also wearing one. So I looked at him and I said, why not you? The whole world, the whole civil society is wearing why not you? I happened to have met him a year after, and incredibly for a politician, he did remember me, and he said the following thing: you see, we've done something about that. And that was precisely after the Glen Eagles, where the European, but also global leaders got together and decided on the debt relief and decided on trying to make a difference when it comes to fight against poverty. By this story, and I'm not placing myself in the focus, which I promised I wouldn't, what I'm trying to say is that civil society plays incredibly important role for connecting what could be individual story of impoverished people all across the world, all across Europe, and trying to join into action, trying to build a call to politics to change, to still pursue a better of themselves, not the conditions that are limiting. So where's the power of the civil society? The first power is to put this powerful idea that there is many struggling for a difference, something that, you know, in current politics of, you know, we might not, it's not clear, and the survey is saying doesn't exist. This is a power of confidence. This is a power of conviction, and this is the power of connectivity. Second thing, it's a question of expertise. I think just before Guillaume was talking about, you know, lack of leadership. I'm not sure it's always connected with the lack of leadership. I think that sometimes many issues, especially inside of the European Union, go under the radar because is it the competence of the European Union? Maybe not. But who decides what is the competence? And let me bring you the second anecdote. And I know that I'm at 2.5 minutes, so my time is sort of roughly wrapping up. When I was precisely part of the youth part of the civil society, the big conversation was taking place about the reform of the European political system. And we as the youth organizations wanted to bring the importance of the youth organizations. One could decide, is it the legislation of the European Union? Are they really that important? Many of them depend on the parties, what is there? And, you know, we've had plenty of discussions, plenty good nights have been spent on trying to struggle in and so on. And then we knocked on the door of a politician, back then Jo Leinen, who was the rapporteur on the European Parliament, as a sort of united civil youth front to say, look, before anything, you have to recognize youth. You can't talk about the future of Europe and then deny simple existence of the youth organizations that are so important in bringing civil education, in connecting young people, in empowering young people inside of the civil society. Result of that, the European Parliament voted a report in which for the first time, youth in Europe has been recognized. I can't take a credit for that. I was just one of the people being in the coalition, putting a pressure. And that's also what the civil society is about, putting a pressure on the issues that for many might not be sounding relevant, but for many are kind of a life matter. And last but not least, civil society is very much about being the counterweight to the corporate lobby. Corporate lobby is very smart on the European Union level. They can convince in very beautiful and skilled words what's best, what surveys are saying, what people want according to Eurobarometer and what they don't want. But what we don't bring is the side stories. If you take the organized, and I would sort of enter into a polemic if the European civil society isn't organized. Perhaps, yes, it's true that there is no European public sphere in a full-fledged existence which would allow them to speak louder and to be more present. But there is many civil society organizations that are joined in the umbrella inside of the European Union's capital, and they perfectly know how and which way they can try to get their foot in the door. And I think that their counterweight, the bringing, you know, civil society part of the story when they incorporate social services providers is incredible, because they basically are the ones translating the story of on the ground. They are translating the story of women in former Yugoslavia, which are trying to make their life stitching the banners into the bags. They are trying to connect the story of the, you know, impoverished young people who are neither in jobs nor in education and essentially wouldn't have anybody else to refer to. And finally, they are the ones who are empowering the voices so that people on the ground do not feel so singular. They feel that they can bring through their connections, they can bring their voice to inside of the European Union. Why does it matter? Because it is true, European Union, and you know, you guys study European Union politics, you know that, you know, today we might get a wonderful idea tonight, but before it comes to pass, probably it's 5, 6, if we're lucky, years later. But nevertheless, what happens with the civil society, it's the action, it's conviction, but it's also a context that can't be ignored. If we look at all the protests in favor of equality, you know, the Indignados, all the others, I mean, they created a specific context that the European Union couldn't ignore. If we look at the youth green mobilizations from last year, I mean, the green is so hard on the agenda because it was brought there by spontaneous young people and by the civil society movement that has been there. So I would say that the power is about bringing the ideas. It's about connecting with real people's issues and being able to raise their voice, but also about giving different perspectives, bringing new actors into the table and providing the counterweight to what's usual, limiting, boring, terrible, and what usually people hate about the European to begin with. I would say that my 3 minutes are up.
Thank you very much, Anya, for this passionate intervention. I think we are very well in the subject, as we can see that power, citizenship, citizen democracy is not so easy to understand, and that they are much more than just the European institution to move the political debate and the political decision. And now I will, let me introduce to you our third speaker, Sébastien Lumet. Sébastien is the director of the Brussels office of the Geopolitical Studies Group, the GEG, Groupe d'études géopolitiques in French. It's an independent think tank funded at the École Normale Supérieure in Paris to offer an interdisciplinary reflection on geopolitics of Europe. Their approach is based on geographical, philosophical, economic, sociological, and literary approaches, and they are placed in a transnational and multi-linguistic perspective. Sébastien is also the Brussels correspondent of Le Grand Continent, a high-quality European media already. They recently interviewed President Macron. They are every day providing very updated and to the point information, like a portrait of Mario Draghi today. So I'm very pleased to welcome Sébastien. I will raise the same question to you. Can you tell us what you think about the power of civil society in the EU?
Well, thanks a lot for having me today. I'm glad to be here. Well, I don't want to sound like the cynic of the group, but I risk sounding like that.
That's good.
Yeah, because I mean I agree with the premise that that Guillaume said, that civil society is very broad. It's a very broad term. It's difficult to pin exactly what we're talking about. But what's sure is that here we're talking about interest representation, because whether it is for a good, a bad, business-oriented, an associative cause, you know, we're always talking about interest representation in Brussels. When you think about interest representation, several things come to mind. The first is that it's a very fragmented landscape. So it's fragmented in Brussels itself. but it's also fragmented among countries, and countries have very different ways of organization. If you think about, for example, foundations, the way they are funded in Germany is significantly different from the way they are funded in France. And it's difficult to have a common representation that's able to move things in Brussels and to bring the voices of the countries in Brussels. So first of all, you need to be effective in the Brussels machinery, and it's something that requires expertise, of course, but it's also something that requires money. And I think that it's something that we see very clearly in Brussels, is that money drives interest representation to a significant extent. It's just a simple fact. And it seems to be very difficult to move things forwards beyond semantic. And even on semantic, it's difficult to move things forward in Brussels because, the ability of representation in Brussels is difficult to construct. Now, lately, for the past few years, with the better regulations, initiatives, etc., of course, the Commission has included much more civil society in its decision policy making, because that's what we are talking about. So there has been significant and tremendous improvements. So that is something to say, and that's really important. Beyond businesses, of course, there are some massive structures that have a significant weight, significant power in Brussels. I think about trade unions, for example, or very large associations who definitely are able to make their voices heard. But as far as civil society initiatives, I do think that it's much more difficult to get efficiently organized in Brussels. So that would be kind of my summary. It's very short for now, because I think what's interesting is to enter into further discussions with the next questions. But I would be, I think civil society has a way of being expressed in Brussels, but I think that the actual consequences of civil society actions are much less impactful than that they could be. And that's what troubles me with this.
Thank you very much, Sebastian. And now we'll mix the second and the third question, because we want to have room for an exchange and to have the questions of the people participating to the conference. So the second question I will raise to Guillaume, wanted to know what your work in the civil society consists in today, but as we already had an understanding about that, what would be your advice for a Sciences Po student or an alumni to find an internship or work in the civil society around European affairs? As you know, the times are difficult, and that's really important also to focus on the career issue, that it's very relevant for our students or our young alumni. So what would be your advice, and how would you frame it related also to your experience in the civil society? Guillaume.
No, regarding student to engage in civil society is not very difficult. You need to speak to me. You need to speak to Sylvain. You need to speak to FEPS, and they are really willing to engage people, to have interns. The question is, there are rules limiting the number of interns, but it's not difficult to contact civil society organization, and you need to take advantage of any meeting, and this is a meeting in this respect. Now the question is how to have an impact, and this was for me a key issue, and that's why I created EuropaNova and I created Civico Europa. And what you need to understand is, if we want to have an impact, we need to be able to have people speaking to political leaders. And we need also to take advantage of a political vacuum. And in politics, there are many political vacuums where leaders don't know what to do. And then they listen to you. Civico Europa, for example, is an association of European opinion leaders. We have the General Secretary of the European Trade Union. We have the former DG of Business Europe. We have the president of the FEPS. We have several chairs of European political group. We have thinkers, intellectuals everywhere in the EU. And these people have the capacity to speak to president, European institution leader, media, and other thinkers. And this gives us a specific capacity to be listened. And I build that in order for us to have a transpartisan reflection and to have a real impact on decision maker. Because for me, it's easier to impact at European level because it is paradoxically much less well organized, but at national level, where political leader knows exactly what they want. So the question is, who are you able to gather around you, with which impact, and are you able to provide political solution for the general interest? And if you are able of doing that in specific crisis, we are in a crisis. The Brexit referendum was a crisis. The French No was a crisis. The populist wave was a crisis. The migration wave was a crisis. You may have a strong impact. But you need to have the skills and the opinion makers with you. It allows to go much quicker. And in fact, when you speak with political leaders with Chatham House rule, they don't have the same speech. They think much freely. They are much more open to ideas, and they are much more open to build collective and useful solution. When you speak to a political leader with a political role, it is not exactly the same guy.
Thank you very much, Guillaume. And I'll raise the same question to Anya. So we had a glimpse of what is your work in the civil society, but what would be your advice to a Sciences Po student or an alumni to find an internship or a work in the civil society or around European affairs?
I see that there is a little commercial break going on with, offering the FEPS advertisement right on. Thanks a lot for that. I think, when you are graduating, especially from political sciences, and I've been there, believe me, on one side, you have a world that is totally open to you. On the other hand, there's a world of anxiety. And I think that there would be the three sort of points that I could offer very generally from my personal perspective. The first one is never give up on the idea that you can and you should change the world. And as infantile that might eventually sound, if you read the book that I think that everybody quotes at every seminar these days, namely Barack Obama, when Barack Obama talks about his own path to the career, he's not talking about me. He's talking about how he was organizing communities, how he was trying to be part of something greater. And I think the first step is to ask yourself the question, what is the calling that you have? Because you might pick up many different callings in your life, but you have to be convinced that if you want to be part of the civil society, and this is a hard stuff. I mean, it's really not that the world changes from one day to another. It's really not that, from one project, you make a massive difference. So there needs to be this feeling of perseverance. There needs to be a feeling of, I'm doing that because I love it, because it's part of how I want to contribute. And I think that's the first part of advice, because listening to yourself is never going to disappoint you. The second thing is never to shy away from the new experiences. In my own career path, I mean, as shiny as it has been presented here at the beginning of the session, I mean, believe me, I have been doing plenty of stuff. I have been, looking after kids at the summer and winter camps, because that was my way of, collecting money for, having holidays on my own. I mean, typical sort of, working ethos as such. And I never thought that that would lead me to a passion of informal education. And that would lead me to actually run the seminars, part of the informal education, which then gave birth to what I do today. being a director for research and training, namely political education, namely capacity building, namely civil society empowerment. That's what I do in my current life. But back then, you know, numbers of years before, when I was still trying and looking out for myself, you know, probably there wasn't even remote. And if someone would have told me, that would be equally possible as, you know, next day you will become an astronaut. So what I'm saying is that, you know, there are many experiences, some of them great, some of them bad, some of them really bad. But altogether, they do build you. So, you know, never shy, even if it's astray from what you finish your master's degree with, never astray from an experience if you think that that can provide a valuable step forward. And last but not least, never forget to enjoy what you're doing. I mean, one of the things that civil society is about connecting. It's about being able to feel solidarity. It's about being able to reach out and extend yourself to the other people. I love working with people, and that has been, you know, something that accompanied me the entire life. My job is about connecting academics and politicians, connecting civil society, because, you know, as a political party foundation, civil society, as, you know, Guillaume and Sebastian have been very precise on the definition. We are a bit of stretch here, but I am ready to admit it. This is about connecting people, but in order to be able to do that, you need to be able to extend assets, to be socializing. Now, I know that I'm saying that in the terrible times of pandemics, that many students enter the university without even seeing, you know, colleagues. We all meet via internet, and it's a bit of an artificial world all to begin with, which doesn't give this full blossoming prospect. I know that the circumstances are hard, and it's very hard to get to the internships. But let's also not forget that, you know, internships has to be a step forward. And that has been something that has been particularly close to my heart, and that I will sort of stop my remark on. At FEPS, when we offer the internships, they are paid internships. They are internships with the program, and they are internships with the clear criteria. And that's very important. I know that with the current job market and with the way the youngest populations is treated, it's very difficult to be picky, if it is possible at all. But nevertheless, you know, the work of labor has to abide by certain rules. And of course, the experience that there is cannot be a part of the exploitation. Once again, on the bright side, never give up the idea the world can be a better place and you can make it a better place. Never shy away from a new experience, and definitely never forget to enjoy what you're doing, because that is the passion that translates into making, you know, the calling possible and appeal to the others.
Thank you very much, and I'm sure some students might send a candidacy as an internship, because it was a very appealing presentation. I will pass the floor to Sebastian, but just before, mention that for those of you wishing to raise question, please feel free to submit question in the chat area, so that we can just jump into the question and answer session just after Sebastian will reply to the same question, which is, we understood a bit your work in civil society, but what would you like to complement what you just said, and what would be your advices for a Sciences Po student or an alumni to find an internship or work in the civil society or on European affairs? The floor is to you, Sebastian.
My microphone. I will start by doing a little promotion myself. I mean, since we're at it, we're also for an intern, so you can apply to both and to many more. No, I mean, I would like to give some original advice, and I mean every character will deal differently with his own experience. So advices are as good as the people who give them. But for sure, I would say the first advice is modesty. Most of you, or all of you then are from Sciences Po. So you've probably been told that you are the elite and that you're fantastic and that you're brilliant students, and you probably are. But you should get into the job market with a great deal of modesty that will only serve you if you do that, especially in Brussels or in European affairs, where it's a complex, it's a rich, it's a diverse environment. you have characters from multiple countries. It's very competitive, but very differently competitive than it can be in your own member state. So be modest and open-minded. I would say with what you do with your first job, I'm talking about the very first, not necessarily the second, but the very first at least, choose a stream and stick to it for a while. That's the thing. It's sometimes it's not fun. Sometimes you know, your first few years you understand things that you had no clue. You understand practical things that you really had no clue before, and that's what the first few years are for. And if you enter those years with the certainty that what you're doing is exactly what you should do, that's not necessarily the best way of looking at it, but you still have to stick to what you're doing for a while and not change or stop after 1 or 2 years. So I think, to me, that's important. But at the same time, I would say one advice would be experiment. Experiment, exhaust yourself, you know, meet as much as people as you can, really be active in different things than work. Don't focus only on your work. Try to expand your horizon to different things. And that leads me to another point, which is, while you are in your first few years, you should make good use of those years to evaluate, understand, and make your own mind about the things you live, the things you experience. So evaluating how the ecosystem works in your profession, how it works around your profession, it's something very important, because then it gives you the ability to know what you get into for your second stage or for your third stage of your career. And I think it's important, because sometimes we underestimate that careers are open. Careers, of course, you can make a lot of your careers, but there are some fundamental things that are kind of necessary steps. I mean, if you want to work for the institutions, you will have to do EPSO. And so if it's something that you want to do and that you really want to make it happen, you have to know what it entails, and you have to work towards that. If you want to do research, you know, it's better to do a PhD. So same thing, you have to explore and see where it takes you. So those are two examples, but I think, yeah, if you manage to cover for the first few years all of those 4 or 5, if you manage to have this mindset when you start, to me, that's the best way for you to maximize your internships or your first year of work.
Thank you very much, Sebastian. And I will let the floor to Sylvia to run the question and answer. Please feel free to raise your questions.
Yes, if you have any questions, just either put them in the chat. Yes, I see that there is one from Domitiana. So we'll start with this one. That asks basically, what are the challenges of the civil society during COVID? Yes, true, since there are fewer possibilities to move, to meet, to organize events. So maybe we can do a very quick round to all of you three, if you want to give us your opinion on it. Maybe we can start from Sebastian this time, since it was the last one starting before.
Yeah, I mean, of course, the difficulty is that you don't get to meet people so easily, so that you cannot really get out for a coffee or go to events the same way, because the events are nice for the content, but they're also nice for the networking you can do afterwards. And also you cannot meet colleagues, you cannot meet friends, etc. So that's obviously something that makes it difficult, especially when you're in a line of work which is extremely social. So it's important to have this aspect, and that has been rendered difficult by COVID for sure. Even to meet with stakeholders, because it's never the same contact if you're in person or if you're online. So that's a challenge. But at the same time, there are also great benefits, I think, because you can also be physically almost at the same time in different spaces. You can enjoy a lot more content. You can be much more flexible in many regards. So I wouldn't frame it only as a negative aspect.
Okay, now let's move to Anya. Thank you.
Yeah, I think that there are interesting statistics when it comes to civil society, but especially, not civil society, but trade unions. On one hand, the statistics are showing that because the more people get lonely, the more people feel isolated, the more they are looking for a connectivity. And especially when it comes to the trade unions, they are looking for someone to defend their workers' right. I mean, right to disconnect, right to working time directive to be put in place. So the trade unions are actually rising in numbers. When it comes to civil society, so it's stricter. One issue is the question of the issues that are arriving, that have been always there, but perhaps not have been taken up so broadly. To give an example, the social care workers, their safety at place, this is coming now as very much as a forefront, whereby those issues perhaps were overlooked in the past. So I think that the agenda, or actually prioritizing of the agenda of the civil society as organized also in Brussels, it's slightly differentiating. But I come from Poland, so even though I have been in Belgium for longer than I would like to admit, but I would like to say that when there are the sort of very painful issues, you can see it in Poland, you can see it in Slovenia, and you can see it elsewhere, Hungary partially. But when there are the issues that actually connect organized and unorganized civil society, people, despite COVID, find a way to express their protest. And I mean, the Black protest in Poland, which connects also with the actions of the European Women's Lobby, which then transcends onto the floor of the European Parliament, is in the form of the debate, of course. There's no question of, legislative process at this spot. There have been reports, there have been discussions, that's at the level where it is. But I would say that civil society has been quite creative. If you look at Slovenia, the government very much limited the space for the political activism. So the citizens got on the bicycles to still express their opinions within the scope of the distance that was available. So I would have a lot of faith in the civil society, because when I was starting my remarks and I was talking about changing the context, bringing the new social movement. For me, civil society, the beauty of the civil society is also an incredible creativity and adaptability of the civil society to be able to rise different points. So what I'm fearing, though, is in the context more of the conference on the future of Europe, in how far from the institutionally guaranteed space there will be for them to actually rise the points that are currently important, and how far those points are not going to be just, buckled away by the fact that they aren't the competence of the European Union directly.
Thank you very much. And let's now listen to the answer from Guillaume. You're still muted, Guillaume. Sorry. Now it's better. Okay now? Yes, yeah, exactly. Yes, perfect.
To relay what Sylvain said in terms of, I would say, professional advice to students. I think one thing is very important is to have a passion and to take advantage of the fact that you can have internship to try your passion. And then you need to follow the track, because all the people I know who follow their track, they were successful. It takes time, but they were successful. And the interest of civil society is not one block. It's think tank, media, trade union, foundation, and many other things. So you can find your way. Regarding the COVID, I think the main challenge for civil society is that there are many new questions that came, and these questions were not under the look of civil society. I give you some example. There was this development of teleworking. What does it mean concretely? When I see to my friend working for Google or for the GAFA, they are supposed to work in London, but they are working in fact in Greece, in Italy, in Spain, in Poland, and they pay tax in London. So there is a specific issue. There will be a huge reorganization of work at the level of the planet. And it means that, in fact, talents are now everywhere. They are not only in Europe or close to you. And this is a big question that civil society need to take over. In this period also, we had time to think about what is really important, what kind of new right and new liberty we can invent. And with the digital transformation, we see that there are, when I see we, his think tank, his foundation, they start to think about the new right, new liberty, new duties of the future. Right to disconnect, but also right to have a pluralistic information in your language, thanks to automated translation. Right to be including from birth to death in society. And these are new possibilities, new ideas, which are coming now. We are trying many things. At the European level, we are trying this vaccination process. We have not the competencies, we have not the expertise, so we are experimenting. And civil society need to think and to draw teaching from that. So this period is really interesting because there are so many things which are happening at the same time, and these things are challenging our way of thinking, our way of seeing the future, and it's a way to reinvent ourselves and to think differently the future. And this is, for me, something, a big opportunity for everybody. We are in a period where we reinvent ourselves.
Thank you very much, really, Guillaume. There are other two questions, actually, that have been posted in the chat. I think they actually refer more or less to the same topic, so I'll try to merge them in order to be answered before the conversation is over. The first one asks, how can we work to rebuild, as you said, it is a bit fragmented right now, the public sphere in Europe, so how can we work to rebuild a European public sphere? And the second one says, asks if there are any differences of perspective in the different European countries on a united or not civil society. So actually, how can we build a more united civil society, and how do countries see the idea of a civil society differently and nationally? This time, maybe we can start from Anya.
Sorry, I was just looking at the last question from Lotta that arrived, so you got me a bit off guard. I think, you know, the European Union is composed of two pillars. I mean, that's the basis of political science. One is connected with the issues that are sort of more of the country specifics, where there's a lot of country bargainings. The other one that is more federal. I work in the more federal pillar, so, you know, more of the political orientation, because I work for the social democratic think tank as such. And of course, the differences are arriving from the conditionality and from the context, because even if you look at the party political foundation, and I said, I wouldn't consider as a part of the civil society, pure civil society, in the same way as, you know, the organizations that work with the social services, women cause, and the others, because, you know, we are also placed differently in the system. I mean, we are part of the system of the institutional funding and so on and so forth. So we have a very privileged position. But of course, there are many differences, hence the expectations, and the bar of the expectations is very much different. What is, however, important, and I think that, you know, the 3 minutes time break in the chat box is now referring to me, is to find the common causes. And I think that it doesn't need to be always the lowest degree of consideration. I think Europe is the sort of address, and Europe is the part of many of our worries. Vaccination has been given as an example. You know, in Poland, to give an example, people before were sort of saying that they don't want to get vaccinated, but now it's the European Union to be blamed for not enough vaccination. So, you know, we do have an interest, if we want to keep Poland and the like countries inside of the EU, to have a European public sphere in which, regardless of competences, the issues of the European importance European Health Union, European citizenship, participation in the Future of Europe conference, where those issues are being discussed. I don't think that we will be able to overcome differentiation, but I also think that, you know, I'm not sure we should. I am still a strong believer in united in diversity. So I think that common causes for a better European Union that is designed to improve living and working conditions for all is a very important one. Last but not least, someone posted the questions how we make sure that those who are not part of the elites can be part of the European projects and can be part of the European citizenry. I think empowerment is the question here, but not empowerment in a sense of, you know, we give the European donations, because if it was the case, the Polish farmers would be probably the most pro-European group in the world. It is a question of feeling a part of a community. And I think, you know, Guillaume was very much talking about Brexit. People in the UK, they felt European, but they didn't feel European citizens. And I think that the question of the citizenship is here key to answer the question how we can make sure that everybody feels empowered, that everybody feels that they have right to a proper job, right to disconnect, a right to social services, you name it, right to equal treatment. I think that's the way of trying to make sure that everyone, that the European Union is inclusive and forward-looking.
Thank you very much, Anya. Now, maybe Guillaume this time, but I see he's not here. Maybe he had some issues. So please, Sebastian.
Thank you. Well, let's be brief. For the European public sphere, I mean, I can speak for my own experience. I mean, that's a topic we work a lot on at Le Grand Continent. So I say it's difficult to forging a European public sphere is also having the mindset of thinking at the good scale of analysis, which is the continental analysis for a lot of issues. We've seen lately that there was a public sphere building up during the crisis when, you know, Mark Rutte had a heavy exchange with Antonio Costa or Giuseppe Conte, when you have had all of those different interactions of leaders who were talking in the press of several nation states that were not their own nation states at the same time, etc. So I would say at the level of the individual, the way to foster this European public sphere is to read, diversify your sources, get to enjoy more content that is not necessarily framed in the intellectual aspect that you're accustomed to, that's not necessarily produced in your own country. Try to build up the patchwork of different analysis. Try to go and seek analysis that's not from your own country or not even from your zone of reference that could most of the time be Anglo-Saxon or something. So I would say at the very level of the individual, the way to reduce this fragmentation is to try and seek content, to bring together content that is not naturally brought together. That's to me, from what I can tell you from my perspective, that's a very important part.
Thank you very much. We have just one last question. That is, are there possibilities for non-EU citizens to participate in the European civil society? For example, the question mentioned citizens from the EFTA, so Norway, Iceland, member countries that maybe are still on the ongoing process of joining the EU or asking for membership. And yeah, actually it's quite an interesting question. I don't really know. I don't have a clue. Sebastian, maybe if you want to go first.
Yeah, that's a good question. I would be lying if I said that I knew for sure, but of course they are. I mean, you know, especially EFTA. I think EFTA as an association that's pretty strongly represented in Brussels. So I think that's a good example that you can absolutely. Sometimes it may be even easier because you know the purpose is more easily identified. But I think there are, yes, of course. I would be extremely surprised if there were no venues, but I mean, that's not an area where I have significant expertise, so I wouldn't be able to say much more.
But I think, you know, this the participation of the non-EU civil society organizations inside of the EU, if you want, way of working is taking place, because many of the organizations that are umbrella organizations for the civil society is based in Brussels. They have, and that's a choice between the full members or associated members coming from countries that are outside of the European Union. To that end, I mean, if you take one of the member organizations of ours, which is Solidar, that exists over 60 years, and that is the associations of social services providers and the workers' education, they are very much active when it comes to also bringing closer the organizations, the civil society organizations that are working, especially on the Western Balkan, with the outlook of possible future enlargement. I think it's extremely an important link because, you know, of course today, and I'm myself institutionalist. I mean, my PhD has all been about political parties and institutions. I love this part of the dimension. But evidently, if we want to discuss the future of the European Union, probably the treaty changes and so on will be part of that. But we will need to answer ourselves the question, what kind of future of the European Union we see when it comes to enlargement of the European Union as well. And I think nobody else is as well prepared to answer this question in how far it is possible as the civil society that was not biased to the different political trends, but continued doing the work on the ground, the work of public engagement, the work of educating, civic educating, providing people with opportunities, providing people with exchanges, providing people with outlook to Brussels. So I would say that these connections do exist. They will exist differently when people get to be in the same European Union, because the problems will become of a different nature. But I would not disregard this massively important part of the work that civil society is providing already, by the way, with the funds of the European Union.
Thank you very much, Anya. I'll leave the floor to the conclusion, so to say, if you want to answer, Guillaume, to the question that you couldn't answer before, like if we have the possibility to build back a European civil society and how is it seen from the different national countries. In the meanwhile, I'll show you again the poll if you want to answer again, and let's see if the answers have changed from the very beginning of the conference. The results, I didn't share them on the chat, I'm sorry. The first results were a vast majority said yes, the civil society has an impact, but actually there was also someone, a good 25% saying no. So yeah, let's see if maybe this has changed. And please, Guillaume.
So has it changed or not? We don't know.
We'll see when people will answer.
No, but behind civil society, the real question is society. Are we capable of developing a European demos? European demos is not a European nation. It's the capacity to build together our future. And this is the real question. And if you look at the European narrative, the political European narrative is an institutional European narrative with the European steel and coal community, the European economic community, the European Union, etc. My own experience, having worked within the European Broadcasting Union and having studied a lot what was done after war, was that many people in all European countries, even in the Eastern country, refused an additional war and wanted to build something new. And this idea was the European integration. And it was not the idea of politicians first. There was a will of European citizens. It's very important because if you look at the European Broadcasting Union and the Eurovision, the European Football League, the CERN, the Center for European Research Nuclear, many other organizations, it was civil society leaders who wanted it and who pushed it. And the same for the European Court of Human Rights. So the initial role of civil society in the European building is huge, and nobody is aware of it. And I think it's something which lacks to the European narrative. Now, if we look at European society now, and what we have done with the We European consultation, so in 27 countries, what we saw is when you ask European citizens to think as European, they provide European answer. When you ask as a national citizen to think what is good for his country in Europe, he answers differently. And this is very important. If you organize a national debate about the future of Europe, you have national answer. If you organize a transnational debate about the future of Europe from the same people, you have a European answer. So think about that. And it's very important because nowadays, with the new technology, we have the capacity to imagine and to design a real plurinational, multilingual, through automated translation, public space. So we can invent the future of European democracy. And for the conference on the future of Europe, we should try to implement this philosophy. Now, for me, the feeling regarding the future of Europe is we have not to start from now. And if we look at the conference on the future of Europe, it is starting from now. We need to think about the world in 20 years, in 30 years, what it will be, and what we want to be, what we want to do, and how we want to act. What new right or what right we want to keep, what new right we want to develop. So we need to have a prospective, forward-looking approach. And for that, we need to educate or to help the citizen. And the civil society, foundation, Le Grand Continent, and many other organizations have a specific role for that. But if they want to play this role, they need to organize together to have a critical mass which allow to organize a real transnational debate. And we are not at the beginning of that. So we have, I consider we have, all of us, a specific responsibility in this respect.
Thank you very much, Guillaume. I'm showing you the results of the poll that has slightly changed from the very beginning. As you see, the percentage of people that think that no, the civil society doesn't have an impact on the European policy and decision-making have sunk. Yes, and it's sinking more and more. So this is quite interesting. Maybe this was what we were missing, actually, a confrontation with some people that actually work in the civil society, and that is quite useful because unlike the fact that online and the fact of online conferences and everything, it's not that easy to exchange properly with practitioners every time. So this was indeed a very interesting and enriching possibility for us. So thank you very much. And also we asked if people could foresee a career in the European civil society, and it seems so for the 100% of the people that answered. So also this one is an interesting result. I think we are at the end of our conversation. I really thank you very much. Frank is suggesting me to pose one last question, really a conclusive one, so just 1 minute per person, and then we'll thank everybody. That could be, can the conference on the future of Europe really change Europe? And which are the conditions that have to be met in order for it to really work? And even if the first person that wants to speak can maybe clarify what the conference on the future of Europe is, because maybe someone of us doesn't know it exactly, would be very nice. Maybe if you want to start with this time, Guillaume, just 1 minute. Thank you.
Okay, so the conference on the future of Europe is the idea that we need to have a discussion on how to improve our policy in order to have a more democratic and more efficient working of the current European institution. Initially, the conference should have been chaired by a European opinion maker, independent from politicians and institutions, in order to provide a real independent and forward-looking output, first thing. And second thing, The initial idea was also to include massively European citizens and European civil society, which would have been to invest dozens of millions of euros in order to organize a real transnational debate. But now the reality is the following: is the member state, the European Commission, and the European Parliament have decided to have a very institutional framework for the leadership of the European of the Conference on the Future of Europe. They have decided that there will be no personality to lead, but there will be two presidency: an institutional presidency with the President of the European Council, of the European Commission, and of the European Parliament, and an executive chairmanship with the three rotating presidency of the Council, so so Portugal, Slovenia, and France. Three commissioners. I think it will be Commissioner Sueca with the VP in charge of the future of Europe. The Slovak commissioner in charge of institutional affairs, and Vice President Jourova in charge of justice and human rights. And the second commissioner was Šefčovič. And there will be 3 members of the European Parliament. With such an organization, you will have a very institutional debate with little margin for European citizens and civil society. In addition to that, they have decided to cut or to limit the initial budget for citizenship and for civil society. So at the moment where we are, I think the level of ambition of the Conference on the Future of Europe is very limited. And it's a pain. But anyway, there is a need for a forward-looking reflection on the future of Europe. And I think there could be an alternative civil society conference on the future of Europe with the objective to define a shared vision for what kind of Europe we want in 2050 and how to go there. And if we, civil society, are capable of organizing that, we will have an influence, a concrete influence on the very institutional conference on the future of Europe, which is going to be conducted by the institution, but it will not be a free exercise as the convention for a European constitution was. It was a real free exercise where there was little limit, few limit. And when I was in charge of the reflection group of the future of Europe at the European Council 10 years ago, we were completely free and the institutional framework was very limited. Now we have a very strong institutional framework to take over, to control the conference. It's not good for ideas, it's not good for citizen engagement, it's not good for ambition.
Thank you very much, Guillaume. Very briefly, Sébastien?
Yes, briefly, the answer is no. Will have very little impact, practically, unfortunately, because it's in order for such a thing to have an impact, it needs to be invested politically at the highest level, and that is not at all the case. I think Guillaume summed it up quite extensively. So that's, yeah, if you don't have this political investment for such an exercise, it will not translate into something substantial. There could be some good surprises stemming from it, but there would be surprises rather than direct consequences, I think.
Thank you very much. Anya?
Yeah, I think, you know, there's so many reasons to be disappointed already. The conference hasn't yet started and it has been promised. You know, we were promised all the citizens' agoras. We were promised the forum on which, you know, it's as enough as each of us could go tonight to the platform of the European Commission in our own language, file the proposal, and the Commission would have to provide the feedback. And this is all, you know, somewhere in the drain, especially when we have institutional approach. That's all true. But on the other hand, for 25 years, we've been discussing the crisis of the European Union in this different disguise. And by now, you know, in this moment of awaiting and tiptoeing down, so many civil society organizations have organized themselves around precisely what has been mentioned here. What would be the vision for the future generation? What would be the hopeful, optimistic stuff after, you know, Brexit, after, you know, crisis hit us, and after we are now experiencing, you know, yesterday's European Parliament exchange is clearly showing the vaccinalization. So there's going to be a massive battle about, you know, how European Union is failing into providing citizens with the security, health, and so on and so forth. And in the midst of that, there is still some spirit of optimism, which I hope, you know, not today. And it's true, it's terrible, and it might be the missed opportunity, but there is so much good spirit still happening around. So, you know, I'm a social democrat, so let me finish on more optimistic note than the colleagues before me. You know, maybe too idealistic, maybe I have been too idealistic the entire evening, but, you know, this is what keeps me alive in Brussels, I would say. And that's probably the last piece of advice that I would like to give in this evening.
Thank you very much, really, for this final optimistic answer, not because the previous ones were not, so to say, appreciated, but just because I really feel, as a student, I say it personally, we really need some sort of optimism in order to look at the incoming months, because it's difficult, not just searching for internship, it's really difficult to think about the future. I'm not being too dramatic, but I think I quite good sum up what also the other students think. And this is why we really need to be optimistic, at least for the close future, and to think that, well, so to say, working together, a better tomorrow is possible.
If I can say just one thing, I'm very optimistic about the future, not about the future of Europe.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, really. Thank you all for the public for being here. And we're really pleased to have you here, and to have had this opportunity to talk with you. Thank you very much also, Frank, that has organized everything. And
thank you to the great 3 speakers, and thank you for all participants. We look forward to meeting you again for next conference. We'll inform you accordingly about that. Have a good evening, everyone.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.